morning, my son.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here today. I love Sundays and I love being with you all as we attempt to make sense of the world as best we can, to reason, to ponder, to reflect together in community. And I am especially pleased when we, like today, welcome new members into the congregation. These wonderful people are now part of a wonderful congregation. They bring with them, as did all of us, a diverse outlook on life, the divine, and perhaps even death. Our diversity of thought is, I believe, one of our greatest strengths. And these new members have decided to cast their lot with us in their search for truth and meaning. It is not a thing to be taken lightly. But I believe they and we are up to the task. Let us wrap them up in our circle of love. We are stronger together. And today we have become stronger still. Well, back in 1991, I got my first real job. I'd been in school for quite a while, earning a bachelor's and master's degree. And the idea was to work my way through a doctoral program without taking out any more student loans. The job was at the University of North Texas, and I would be working on the residence hall staff. I'd be supervising a bunch of resident assistants as they watched over the students living in the dormitories. It was a fun job. It was a great experience and paid the bills while I continued my education. It is also where I met the woman I'd be privileged to marry one day, Gail. So it turned out to be one of the best things I've done in my life. I was 26 years old at the time, and one of the people I reported to in that job seemed pretty cool to me. She was very relatable to students and staff and faculty. She was funny. She was smart. I was in her office one day, and she pulled what appeared to be, to me, some very obscure reference into the conversation. I can't remember today exactly what her reference was, but it sort of reminded me of how the character named Cliff Clavin in the television show Cheers would sometimes pull something out of the air. Sort of did that every episode. So I just stopped and looked at my supervisor, and she said, "Okay, I admit it. I'm a nerd." Now, in my mind, she clearly was not what I viewed to be a nerd. And I could still easily remember how being a nerd in middle school and high school was something I always wanted to avoid. And I had been successful. I had not been accused of being a nerd and was pleased with this. But here was someone who was proclaiming herself to be one without hesitation or embarrassment. I thought of this woman recently as I was reading a book titled Nerd, How Dorks, Dweebs, Techies, and Trekkies Can Save America, and Why They Might Be Our Last Hope. It was written by David Anderegg, who is a child psychologist and teaches at Bennington College in Vermont. Anderegg is concerned about the rise of anti-intellectualism in this country and believes it may create some difficulties for us as a society as we continue to manufacture less as a nation. It is our intellectual property that we may come to rely on in the global market. Anderegg views the way we think about smart people as nerds as a stereotype. And the stereotype goes something like this, where intellectuals are viewed to be unsexy, They'll never be able to attract someone as a romantic interest because they are not much interested in that sort of thing. Nerds are also interested in minutia. So they have the ability to make just about anything boring, including sex. They are well versed in technology, able to program computers and engineer things, create things, but they are also slobs. Uninterested in personal appearance, they do very little in attempting to wear what is in style. Their desks and offices are piles and piles of books and papers, but they can generally find just about anything in there. And Anderegg believes nerds are persecuted. They are disliked simply because they are who they are. And like other stereotypes, this is a stereotype which puts people into categories first, puts them in a box that is difficult, if not impossible, to escape. And as a stereotype, at its most base level, it is a way of dehumanizing another human being. As I read the book and recalled my desire not to be labeled as a nerd growing up, and remembered the boys, and they were mostly boys in my experience who earned the label, it reminded me of how cruel young people can be. Today I don't think of intellectuals like this at all. I'm envious of how clever they are. In fact, I often wish I shared more of their ability to come up with unique responses to difficult problems. Like the time where, on a train to a math and engineering convention, a group of math majors and a group of engineering majors sat in the same car. Each of the math majors had his or her own train ticket. But it became clear that the group of engineers had only one ticket amongst them. The math majors started laughing and snickering at the engineers when one of the engineers said, "Here comes the conductor." All of the engineers went into a bathroom. Now the math majors were puzzled at this. Then the conductor came on board and said, "Tickets, please," and collected tickets from all the math majors. He then went to the bathroom, knocked on the door, and said, "Ticket, please." And one of the engineers stuck the ticket under the door. The conductor took it and left. And all the engineers came out of the bathroom a few minutes later. And the math majors then felt really stupid. So on the way back from the convention, the group of math majors had one ticket for the group. They started snickering at the engineers again, for this time the whole group had no tickets amongst them. When the engineer lookout said the conductor is coming, all of the engineers went to one bathroom, all of the math majors went to another bathroom. Just before the conductor came on board, one of the engineers left their bathroom, knocked on the other bathroom, and said, "Ticket, please." I see, I never would have thought to do that. But if you are a young child, the people who Anderegg works with primarily in his therapy practice, you are often concerned about being labeled a nerd because of the stereotype. If you have intellectual gifts, you might try to hide them, or worse, you may not nourish them and choose not to pursue them so the other children will not tease you. To a young person, fitting in is often one of the most important things in the world. And by the time you no longer care as much of what others say, you can be far behind in things like math and science. and having fewer talents in math and science and engineering hurts our country. While in other countries, they do not seem to have this same anti-intellectual labeling. In fact, in countries like India and China, people are sometimes shamed for not being intellectual enough. And they are turning out many more scientists and engineers and mathematicians and computer programmers. Now, what I found particularly interesting is that Anderegg sees some of this anti-intellectualism emerging in the 19th century. And in some ways, he blames one of our Unitarian ancestors for part of the discord. He points to Ralph Waldo Emerson and a talk he gave at Harvard, his alma mater. Emerson had earned both his undergraduate and divinity school degrees there. This was 1837, and Emerson had already left the Unitarian ministry when he delivered his talk titled The American Scholar to the Harvard chapter of Phi Beta Kappa. In it, he says there are three great teachers of men, and at the time, men were the only people being formally educated at institutions of higher education. The three great teachers were nature, books, and action. The observation of nature is given primacy initially. It is the greatest teacher of men. One can observe directly, with no mediator, no teacher, no priest to interpret and get in the way of your learning. Books, on the other hand, are almost merely tolerated. Books are just the thoughts of other men, and we are called to think for ourselves. But both of these, though it is listed in the third position, seem to be a lesser distinction than that of action. Sitting around and reflecting by oneself is okay as far as that goes, as long as you don't sit around and think too much. Americans are, first and foremost, says Emerson, men of action, not of reflection. Reflection, he seems to almost be saying, is for nerds. He will even strongly imply those men who think too much are effeminate. It's sort of a brassy thing to say, isn't it? Right there in front of his old school, right there in front of some of his old professors, right there in front of the best students in the bastion of the best higher education the United States has to offer. Think if you must, but don't think too much. Do something. And this type of attitude was pervasive in politics then, as we sometimes still see today. When Andrew Jackson was battling another of our Unitarian ancestors, John Quincy Adams, for the United States presidency, it was said that you could vote for Adams, who could write, or you could vote for Jackson, who could fight. Adams was made into a one-term president. And in our own time, you and I saw the nerds, Al Gore and John Kerry, men who could go on and on, and on and on, about all sort of policy matters and scientific findings, lose to a brush-clearing, hard-partying, proud of his C-average, elite-issuing George W. Bush. Now, it doesn't always come out like that, but it does often enough. In fact, I've heard some say, we were witness to an athletic man of color who downplayed his elite education, and an elderly curmudgeon, no longer athletic, who seemed to yell at people about getting off his lawn in the 2008 presidential election. And then in 2012, he defeated a fellow who was made out to be very nerdy and socially awkward. In fact, if you were to Google Mitt Romney and nerd, There would be a great many hits you could spend your time reading if you were so inclined. Now, some of us may believe it is best for the country to have the absolute brightest, most intelligent human being in the world's most powerful office. We may disagree who that is, but it appears the person better not come off as too intelligent, too elite, too knowledgeable of policy matters or science, because many people in the United States, it appears, would rather be able to relate to their president, have a beer with their president, because we are a people of action, not of reflection. Should Ralph Waldo Emerson be blamed for all of this anti-intellectualism we seem to have in this country? Of course not. But it does, I think, speak to how influential some people can be and how attractive some ideas can be when we perhaps feel uncomfortable with our own lesser abilities. It is sometimes easier, particularly in our formative years, to belittle others, to take them down a peg when they step outside of the normative circle. But when we encourage people to be who they are, when we encourage our children to be who they are, to accept others for who they are, we are all better for it. They will likely attain greater heights, do bigger things, be of more assistance to others if we encourage people to be who they really are. I think we've had 13 people join Westside as members since our membership class back in February. As you know, not all of them are here today with the holiday weekend, but each one of them is truly a special human being. We are all special human beings, all for a variety of reasons. There are no nerds here. The label is not one I will continue to use to stereotype another human being. These are people with special talents. These are people with special gifts. These are people who sometimes do things differently, oftentimes better than you may do, and certainly better than I can do. Labels, even if used humorously, can bring back hurtful memories. But there is one label we have chosen, one label you and I have resolved to take on, and I hope wear proudly for others to see, and that is the label of Unitarian Universalism, where we do our best to love, to search for truth and meaning, and maybe above all else, respect and admire people for who they really are. No labels, no boxes. It is here, within this community, that we do our best to recognize the worth and dignity of another simply because they are. As we rise together in body or spirit, and join in singing our closing hymn, number 112, Do You Hear?